Now, I have left a lot of time for questions and debate, because generally that's the most fun bit. Now, we've got queues of questioners on both sides. Can we start on this side, please?
Yep. Hello, Nigel. My name's David Lawson. I'm from Northern Ireland.
I'd never have guessed.
Like you, last year I voted for Brexit because I believe that was the right choice to make. But I just want to ask you, following the Irish Prime Minister's comments recently about Ireland's refusal to help Britain work out a sensible border for Northern Ireland and the Republic, what do you think is the best solution for that border?
Well, can I just say that Ireland's Prime Minister, Ireland's new Prime Minister, is kind of falling into line with Monsieur Barnier, who's the European Union's chief negotiator, Mr Juncker, who's the European Commission President, although after lunch he's not much good for anything, but there we are. And what they're doing is they're putting their political belief in this grand project ahead of sensible, sound economics. You know, Ireland should never have joined the euro. It's been a complete mistake. Two-thirds of Irish overseas business is denominated in sterling or in US dollars. 40% of the Irish agricultural produce is sold into the UK market, and yet here's the Irish Prime Minister doing his best, effectively, to scupper the Brexit deal. I think it's very, very foolish, and whenever you meet Irish people who tell you, oh, of course, the Irish people love the European Union, no, they don't. They rejected the Nice Treaty in a referendum, they rejected the Lisbon Treaty in a referendum, and they were forced to vote again. The best way to keep that border as free as we possibly can is to have a non-tariff deal between the United Kingdom and the rest of the European Union. After all, they sell us about £75 billion worth of goods more every year than we do them. So if he was sincere about keeping an open border, then he'd opt for the tariff option. What they're doing is they are so scared that if the UK is seen to leave with a good deal, that other countries will want to do the same thing and the whole structure will come crashing down. And it's incumbent upon the British government not to give in, frankly, to what I see as being their blackmail. You know, they're asking us for an exit bill. I mean, we own half the place already. I mean, they should be paying us. So look, I'm very unimpressed with the new Irish Prime Minister, and I think we're not far away now from seeing a big Eurosceptic movement developing in the country of Ireland. I think it'll come. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Nigel. I'm also from the UK.
Are there any Americans here today? Whereabouts are you from?
Northwest England.
Very good.
In your speech, you talked about the rise of corporatism, and basically my question, two-part question, is do you think that the rise of corporatism has led to hard-left leaders who praise Venezuela, like Jeremy Corbyn, rising to power? And also, if God bless the earth and Jacob Rees-Mogg became Prime Minister of the UK, would you support him as Conservative Party leader?
Okay, the rise of corporatism. Yeah, I mean, one of the extraordinary things about this is that the trade union movement, which, you know, historically was there to defend the rights of workers so that workers could have decent conditions and decent pay, and yet the TUC in our country, which is the Trade Unions Congress, the body for all the trade unions, the TUC is in love with the European Union project, which actually has been the biggest supporter of corporatism that we've seen anywhere in the Western world. And you may think I'm cynical, but I genuinely believe that people's political opinions get changed by money. And the one thing, you know, Stalin used to kill his opponents, right? The European Union buys them off with cash. I mean, the last questioner, asked me about Irish politics. Sinn Féin, who I'm not a great fan of, I have to say, but Sinn Féin believed in independence of Ireland from the rest of the UK, and of course independence of Ireland from the European Union. If you're a nationalist, you can't ever support being part of the European project, and yet they've changed their minds in the last 10 years. Why? Money. And I think with the trade union leaders, I suspect many of them have gone over to Brussels on Eurostar, rather enjoyed the food, rather enjoyed the wine, and thought, you know what, it's not so bad here after all, is it? So that is how corporatism has succeeded. And yeah, it's ironic that we're seeing leftism growing in the United Kingdom, but its analysis is wrong. It's blaming capitalism. I don't think free market capitalism exists. Now, as for Jacob Rees-Mogg, do you all know who Jacob Rees-Mogg is? Maybe not. You do, some do. I mean, Jacob is a wonderfully eccentric backbench member of Parliament. I regard him as a friend. I think he's a delight. And I had him on my radio show the other day, and I interviewed him, and I said, Jacob, your wife gave birth this week to your 6th child. I said, how are you getting on with the nappy changing? And he sort of hummed and hawed and said, well, actually, Nanny does that sort of thing. And I said, have you ever changed the nappy, Jacob, in your life? And he said, no. I said, you're not exactly a modern man, Jacob, are you? And he bit back by saying, no more than you, Nigel. So there you are. So there you are. He has got a bite too. I don't know what's going to happen. It would be unprecedented for somebody to come from the back benches to being Prime Minister. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I wouldn't rule it out happening at some point in the future. All I do know is that the United Kingdom has a Prime Minister whose job is to oversee the Brexit process, and yet who supported the other side in the war. And I don't think, actually, she's a credible leader of the United Kingdom, and I think for the sake of everybody, she needs to go. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Farage. My name is Zach Sobek. I'm from Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. And I wanted to thank you for making the long trip out. I also wanted to thank you for being one of the very few politicians on the right to criticize corporatism, the globalist big multinationals. And I would just like you to maybe expand upon why the economic populists, if you will, truly have the best interests of right-wing politics in mind and not the global multinationals.
Well, I mean, the truth is, of course, that the right of politics has been very split on this issue. You know, the one thing that the big global corporates do have is a very effective lobbying machine. You know, they're kind of out there the whole time meeting political figures and even aspiring political figures. So they are very good at what they do. And there are some on the right in politics who convince themselves that actually this is the way things are, and therefore this is the way things must be. But the effect of the Goldman Sachses and many others, just had to mention Goldman really, I mean, isn't it amazing, isn't it? I mean, the Italians, when Berlusconi was Prime Minister of Italy, and then he sort of raised doubts about Italy staying in the euro, there was a coup d'etat staged by Brussels, and he was replaced by an unelected Prime Minister who'd been a former director of Goldman Sachs. And exactly the same thing happened in Greece. So this unhealthy relationship that I talked about earlier between big banks, big business, and big politics, or even owning big politics, I think the evidence is there for all to see. Look, if you finish up with a system of legislation that just spews out rules and directives, and sure, they're all for health, they're all for safety, they're all for the environment, they're all for motherhood and apple pie. It all sounds wonderful, but actually what you do is you make it impossible for the small man and woman to establish themselves and to challenge the orthodoxy that exists within any industry. As a Thatcherite, and a Reaganite, I believe in free market competition. I think it's competition that moves man on. And I think that there are too many who call themselves conservatives who, frankly, over the last few years, simply stopped thinking and simply stopped understanding. Now, the biggest business lobby in the United Kingdom is called the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. And yet, in private sector jobs, they only represent 9% of employees in the United Kingdom. Businesses with fewer than 20 employees represent 60% of jobs in the private sector. And we're hearing too much from the big businesses. We have an agenda dominated too much by the big businesses. And I think that conservatism needs to refocus and re-understand that giving the small people the opportunity creates competitiveness, creates more income, and in terms of technological advance, is likely to push man forwards and not backwards. We need to think about this rather than just accepting the status quo. What's your view?
I would agree with a lot of that. I just wish the right could shed itself of the political donor class, the big multinationalists who are pursuing globalism and are not pursuing conservatism, and I just really appreciate people like you. They're rare, but you're willing to take the stand.
Yeah, well, I don't get invited to many corporate speeches, I can tell you.
Good to hear. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Nigel. My name
Hello.
is Samir, and I go to Bunker Hill Community College. And I wanted to ask, in the grand scheme of things, it seems that UKIP was a single-issue party, with the main goal being getting Britain out of the European Union. Now that UKIP has accomplished that, and after the negotiations are finished and it's all over and Britain is out, would you say that you would like to see UKIP dissolve into the Conservative Party or continue to be there into the future?
Well, I mean, what we should say is this, that UKIP, in some ways, was the most successful political party ever established in the West. I mean, we set this party up. They all said we were bonkers. They all said we get absolutely nowhere. And we have completely turned around the political landscape by 180 degrees in the United Kingdom. Where does UKIP go from here? Where does UK politics go from here? That all depends on what Brexit deal we finish up with. You know, you may see some protests from the Remainers, or the Ramonas, as we call them, in the United Kingdom, and you might see Bob Geldof screaming and shouting on a microphone, and a few protests in Parliament Square, but do not underestimate the potential anger of Middle England if, having gone out and in many cases voted for the first time in their lives, believing they'd achieved this huge victory, if that is frustrated, if that isn't delivered, then I think we will see the second seismic shock in British politics after Brexit, and it will come at some point in the early 2020s, and whether it comes with the name UKIP attached to it, or whether UKIP is part of a new sort of coalition that forms saying Brexit means Brexit, I can't right now predict. But, if, as your question suggests, it'll all be okay, end of March 2019, we'll have Brexit, there'll be no need for UKIP anymore, that, I'm afraid, is wrong. I think the great Brexit betrayal has already begun. I'm hearing British ministers speaking about fisheries, speaking about financial contributions, speaking about immigration, and frankly, doing so in a way that is backsliding, is gutless, and is weak. And I think we're going to get Brexit, but we may finish up in 2 years' time with Brexit in name only. And all I can tell you, having spent 25 years of my life fighting for the cause that everybody said was literally impossible, was bonkers, was balmy, could never happen, all I can say is that if Brexit is frustrated, then I would have absolutely no choice, personally, but to throw myself back into the frontline fight of British politics to make sure that we do really, really get it. All right? Thank you. Sir.
Hello, Mr. Farage. My name is Benjamin Schrader from Texas A&M University, and I have to say I'm one of your biggest fans in the world. For sure, you're amazing. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think will be the next country to leave the EU?
Ah, right. Yeah, this is really a gambling question, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Well, okay. It won't be Germany. Because after all, why would you want to leave something that you're now virtually totally in control of? And, I mean, it is amazing. When the euro crisis hit back in 2008, the people running the European Club, people like Mr. Barroso, the former Maoist and former Portuguese Prime Minister, who, as I pointed out to him repeatedly in my helpful interventions in the European Parliament, that he was unelected, and he never liked that. But the truth is that when the euro crisis hit, when the banking crisis hit, the world looked to the only European leader who frankly had any authority, and that was Mrs. Merkel, not the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. Now, I think in many ways, since that date, Mrs. Merkel has made one truly catastrophic error. And just to say, as many of you that want to come into the European Union, you're all welcome, we can cope, without having any ability or any means to security clear a single one of them, I think will go down as one of the great historical mistakes, and I think will lead over the next decades, to a great deal of misery in many parts of Europe. And what an irony that over the course of the last couple of days, the EU have changed the rules for getting security cleared in airports. So reputedly in Mallorca the other day, it was taking 3 hours to check on to an aeroplane because the EU say they're now getting tough with terrorism, but if you come on a rickety boat from North Africa, then there's no problem. I mean, you couldn't invent some of this stuff. It won't be Germany, and it won't be France either. What I think is important to explain to an American audience is this. You know, in 1870, the newly unified Germany under Bismarck marches, crosses the Rhine, and causes a war. That very same country, in 1914, breaches Belgian neutrality that leads, of course, inevitably to the First World War. And then in 1940, they come and do it all again. I mean, 3 times in the space of a 310 lifespan of an ordinary person, the Germans come across the Rhine with bad intent. So, the actual idea after 1945 that France and Germany should sit down together and break bread and start to become friends and start to trade with each other is something that no sane human being could ever think was a bad idea. The problem with the European project is that it thought that war had been caused by the existence of nation state, and therefore the objective was to abolish nation state, but never to tell the participating peoples that that was actually the plan. So friendship, trade, cooperation, you know, being good neighbours, all of that makes a great deal of sense. However, the argument that because we have the European Union, there's been no war, is an argument which, I mean, frankly, I think it's ludicrous. I mean, were the Germans going to come again? I mean, are they that bad a people? You know, I mean, you know, the answer is that Germany was smashed into total submission an absolute humiliation in 1945, and that country now and its leaders have an entirely different mindset. This is no longer a militaristic nation. It doesn't pose a military, might pose an economic, but it doesn't pose a military threat to anybody. But that argument still, I would say to you that in France and in Germany and perhaps in Belgium, not that I'm always very nice about Belgium, but there we are, that argument still has some resonance. However, if I had to pick the big country that I thought was the joker in the pack, it is Italy. Why? Why? The Italians, in the First World War, supported us. And then in the Second World War, they started off supporting the Germans, and then they split, and half fought with us and half fought with the Germans. For Italy, there is no emotional, historical attachment to this idea of joining together because of war, because they're not, as a nation, emotionally tied to either side of this very long-running dispute that went on for 75 years, you know, across Rhineland, Europe. That's point number one. Point number two is that economically, the euro has been a disaster. There has been no growth in Italy, folks, for 20 years. No growth in Italy for 20 years. Youth unemployment in Italy is now touching 40%. This isn't working. So the economics aren't working. And thirdly, they are a Mediterranean people. And I think for them, arguments about being safe and sensible and secure have far less resonance than they would in the cooler northern climes of Scandinavia or Northern Europe. And I think if there's a shock coming, if there's a major shock coming from a big country, Italy is top of my list. Right now, folks, in the opinion polls in Italy, a man called Beppe Grillo, who is the best-known stand-up comedian in Italy, is currently in the lead in the opinion polls. It's quite tough to tell who the jokers are now, isn't it? There will be general elections in Italy will take place at the latest in February of next year, and I think you're going to see a very Eurosceptic parliament in Italy. I'm not saying they'll leave quickly, but I think inevitably Italy is moving towards leaving. The one country that should have left years ago is Greece. And I think for anybody that believes in democracy, I think the way that the little Greeks have been crushed, not just by the European Union, the IMF here in Washington have also played a shameful role, in my opinion. You know, if you vote for a government, it's not up to international authorities to say they can't put in place their manifesto. And you know, the Greek economy has now contracted by 28% since 2008. Even at the depths of the American Depression in the 1930s, the maximum fall of the economy from top to bottom was 16%. In Greece, it's fallen 28%. So I think, look out for the Mediterranean. I think there are major shocks to come. I mean, I will say this to you and to all of you. They all say in Europe now, oh, it's okay. It's all going to be fine. The populist wave of 2016 is over. Just look at France. Monsieur Macron has won in France, which proves that our European supranational project is back on track. What they don't look at is that in the first round of the French presidential elections, 47% of people voted for candidates who were basically secessionists, something that was unthought of. And look at the east of Europe. Look at Hungary. In fact, a very famous British commentator, political commentator called Andrew Marr, he said, if you look at the statements of the prime ministers of Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, he said, they make Nigel Farage sound like a Foreign Office diplomat. and these are countries that have lived under communism, that have lived under Nazism, that have lived under totalitarian regimes, and when that wall came down, and what a great line of Ronnie's that was, tear down this wall. I mean, it really was, wasn't it? It really, really was. But, you know, they've had democracy since 1990, and they saw the European Union as being a wonderful opportunity of getting closer to the West, and indeed through NATO, of getting a bit closer to America as well. Big part of the thinking in countries like Poland, don't underestimate that. And now you have the Hungarian Prime Minister saying, well, maybe this European Union is beginning to look and feel a bit like the old Soviet Union in terms of how it operates. So I think whether you look at the split, there is a cultural split from north to south caused by the euro. There is a cultural split from east to west in Europe caused by religion and attitudes to immigration and indeed Islam too. The European project is dying on its feet. It's only a question of how long it takes. And all I can say is, thank goodness we had the sense to get out before the train hits the buffers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.